thanks to Murad II, the Ottoman Empire was able to regenerate a lot of pride and a lot of prestige, and also consolidate its territories both in Rumeli and in Anatolia. And the Ottoman Sultan had become once again a figure that was respected within their domains and feared by their enemies outside of their domains. Murad died in 1451 and he was replaced by his son called Mehmet. He became Mehmet II, and he was of a very, very, very different mentality and character and personality to his father. And when he came to the throne, he was only 21. So how would this young man do? Would he consolidate the empire? Would he ruin the empire? Or would he expand the empire? Mehmet II was the grandson of Mehmet I, Mehmet Çelebi, Mehmet the Honourable, the man who's also considered the second founder of the Ottoman Empire. He's also the man who founded this mosque, the Eski Cami, here in Edirne. And when Mehmet II was a young boy, his mother died, so he was raised by his stepmother, who was a Serbian Greek Orthodox lady, who was one of the other wives of his father, Murad II. As per Ottoman protocol, he got a top-class education as a child. In particular, he knew 6 languages. He could speak Turkish, Persian, Arabic, Greek, Latin and Serbian, which he probably learned from his stepmother. In terms of religious education, a religious scholar called Ak Shamsuddin was entrusted to teach him all the tenets of the faith and also to make his personality a God-fearing Islamic one. As a young boy, he accompanied his father, Murad II, on lots of military campaigns, and of note, he stood outside the walls of Constantinople while his father was besieging the city. Mehmet II was the first Ottoman Sultan to be born here in Edirne, and because of that he was around Balkan ethnicities all the time, especially people who had been through the Divşerimi, the blood tax system, which generated the Balkan Janissaries, and this would have a huge effect on his outlook. When his father died, he was in Manisa, governing a far province in western Anatolia as per Ottoman protocol. He got on his horse and he rode to Edirne, the capital, to take his seat on the throne as the Ottoman Sultan, and straight away he started to plan how he was going to accomplish a dream he had had ever since he was a little boy. لا تفتحن قسطنطينية ولا نئم الأمير أميرها ولا نئم الجيش ذلك الجيش. Constantinople will be conquered. What a great army it will be, what a great leader it will be. Those are the words and a prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, predicting that this city was going to fall. For 800 years all Muslim rulers wanted to be the one that was going to take the city, but it hadn't happened. But Mehmet was a young man, but he was also an ambitious man with lots of dreams. And ever since coming to power, he'd studied every single military handbook he could get his hands on to try and find an edge, an advantage to allow him to take the city. He knew what he wanted to do. The problem was his viziers. They were Turkish aristocrats who had also been the viziers of his father, and they didn't like this audacious plan to try and take the unconquerable city. They thought it would destabilize the empire. However, Mehmet had his own viziers, which he brought with him, and they were from the Balkans and they were much younger, and they were products of the Divşerimi system, so they were built for war and statecraft. The old guard and the new guard had different experiences and different upbringing and different expectations. Who do you think Mehmet was going to listen to? Constantinople is a city in a V shape, surrounded by water on its eastern side, the Golden Horn, and water on its western side, the Sea of Marmara, and the Great Walls went around the whole city. In order for Mehmet to be successful in his siege attempt, he would need a plan for the walls and the water. As for the walls, he was approached by a Hungarian Christian man called Orban, who offered to build him the best cannon the world had ever seen to help him shatter the walls. The year earlier, he'd approached the Byzantine Emperor and offered him the same service, but the Byzantine Emperor couldn't afford Mehmet could afford though, and he took him up on the offer straight away. So that was the wall sorted. As for the water, if any ships were able to reach Constantinople, they would be able to supply them, and that would prolong the siege, which would be a disaster for Mehmet. So in order to stop that from happening, he built this structure behind me, Rumeli Hisari. He built it in 6 months, and it is said that he himself took part in making it. Now, any ship that sailed down the Black Sea and tried to provide the city of Constantinople with provisions would face cannon fire and would sink. Everything was set. All that needed to happen now was get his cannons to the great walls of Constantinople. And the Ottomans had 100,000 soldiers. The Byzantines only had 9,000, but they had the city walls. The ruler, Constantine XI, was determined to protect his empire, not to lose his city, and to survive. So, as usual, he called for help from Europe, but only a few Genoese mercenaries showed up. Mehmed offered him a peaceful transfer of the city from his authority to his authority, but this was flat out rejected, and with that, the cannons were firing on the northern walls of the city. The cannon, which was made by the Christian man Oban, could fire a cannonball 1 mile in distance, which was great, and it was the best weapon the world had ever seen up until this time. And it only had one problem though. After being fired, it would take a few hours for them to have to reload it before they could fire it again. In that time, the Byzantines could repair the walls of the city. It wasn't going anywhere, so Mehmed had to come up with another solution, and he got his Serbian Christian Orthodox subjects, who were happy to fight for him against their co-religionists, to dig tunnels under the ground to try and get to the walls and blow the walls up. The Byzantines found out. They dug down and they poured Greek fire and flushed them all out. Now, a siege can only go on for so long, especially when there's 100,000 troops outside a city. It's a logistical nightmare. So Mehmet had to open up another front in this war and spread the Byzantine forces more thinly so they couldn't keep on repairing the walls. And for that, he would need more help of the Christian variety, and this time it would be Catholics. The walls of Constantinople on the eastern side, on the Golden Horde side, were not as well prepared and not as strong as the walls on the northern side, and the Ottoman soldiers had realized this, so they wanted to attack the city from the east. The only problem is they couldn't get into the Golden Horn because the Byzantines had placed a big chain across the opening of the Golden Horn, and any ship that tried to sail down would hit this chain and then would sink. Mehmet had to act fast. He needed a plan because he knew help from Europe might be coming anytime soon. And what happened next was unthinkable, very difficult, but it was also very high risk and also high reward if it was able to be pulled off. This is the Galata Tower in the Galata region, which is to the east of the Golden Horn. And back at the time of the siege of Constantinople with Mehmet II, this place was under the control of the Genoese, who were Catholic merchants, and most of the time more merchants than Catholics. And they were allies with the Byzantine Empire, who were just across the Straits of the Golden Horn. The plan for Mehmet II was to transport his ships from the Bosphorus behind the Galata Tower and place them in the Golden Horn. But to do that, he would need the Genoese to keep quiet and not tell the Byzantine Empire, even though they were allied with them. And Mehmet promised them that he would give them trade concessions if he took the city, if they were to keep their promises and keep it all quiet. And they agreed. So there you go, they were more merchant than Catholic. And the plan was enacted at night, and all the ships were transported manually by the soldiers behind this tower, and the Byzantines woke up the next morning and they saw all the Ottoman fleet in the Golden Horn, and they got the shock of their lives. Now they had to spread their forces even more thinly round the walls, which would have huge ramifications for the northern wall and the cannons that were firing directly at it. With the Byzantine forces now spread so thinly across all sides of the city, they could not repair the damage to the wall with each cannonball, and sooner or later the wall was going to collapse. Constantine XI knew the game was up, but he was no coward. He wasn't going to flee. He had the full weight of Roman history bearing down on him, and he'd rather fight and die than see the city in the hands of the Ottomans. When the walls did break, Muhammad al-Fatih released the Balkan Janissaries. The elite fighting force that were born Christian, became Muslim, and were loyal only to Islam and the Sultan. And with that, they entered the city and the fighting continued inside. Constantine XI threw himself into the fray of battle, never to be seen again. And shortly after, Muhammad al-Fatih entered the city as the man who had fulfilled the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Mehmet II, now to be known as Muhammad al-Fatih, Muhammad the Conqueror, made his way to the Hagia Sophia. Now, Constantine XI was definitely a brave man, there's no doubt about that, and he was a hero for the Byzantine Empire. But the question is, was he a wise man? You see, if he had accepted the terms of a peaceful transfer of the city before the sieges started, then according to Islamic Sharia law, the contents of the city, the buildings and especially the churches, would not have been allowed to have been touched by the Muslims, and it would have been kept as churches and protected as churches according to Islamic law. But because the walls had been breached in the siege and the fighting continued within the city, now the contents of the city, the buildings, were considered what's considered as what's called ghanima, or war booty, and allowable in Islamic law to take by the Muslims. Hence, when Muhammad al-Fatih saw this, he decided to make this church his new imperial mosque. And when he walked in, he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Muhammad al-Fatih adopted the title Qaisar Rum, which means the Caesar of Rome, and this is not a title which Muslim rulers had used before in the past. So by adopting it, he's really speaking to Europeans inside the empire and outside the empire, and the message he's giving them is that we, the Ottomans, are a continuation of an imperial order. Also by Muslims knowing that there is a ruler out there in the world who has the title Qaisar Rum, the Caesar of Rome, what he's doing is he's keeping that memory in their minds, that when they read, all these Muslims all around the world, when they read the hadith and the prophecy and the saying of the Prophet Muhammad about taking Constantinople, they will always remember him and see him as the man who did it, increasing his prestige. He also wanted to keep the visual public memory of his achievement alive, and he would do that by not destroying Byzantine architecture, but taking the buildings and Islamifying them. Thereby his accomplishments will not be diminished in the eyes of people when they came to the city. And a classic example of that is the Hagia Sophia. Another example of this is the name of the city. The name of the city, contrary to public belief, did not change from Constantinople to Istanbul. He kept the name as Constantinople because all the Muslims from all around the world, when they read the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, they would hear the word Constantinople, and Constantinople would still exist. If we change the name, then this linkage may have gone in the minds of the Muslims. The change of name in the city only came 100 years ago when a certain someone wanted to try and erase as much of the Ottoman past and Greek past of this city as he could. And if you want to know more about him, make sure you subscribe, press the bell button, and you'll hear about him in the last episode. When Mehmet the Conqueror took control of Constantinople, it was a city in tatters, mainly due to the Fourth Crusade, which happened in 1204. Latin Catholic Crusaders had planned to go to Jerusalem to fight Muslims, but they stopped off in Constantinople and decided to ravage the Greek Orthodox city instead. Ever since then, the city had been a bit derelict and it had become depopulated. Mehmet would have to rebuild the city and repopulate it. And in order to repopulate it, he asked people from all around his empire, from Anatolia and from Rumeli, to migrate to Constantinople and take part in the rebuilding. And anyone could come. It didn't matter what religion you were, whether you were Muslim, Catholic, Orthodox or Jewish. And when they came, they knew that they were going to be placed in the millet system, which had already experienced in other parts of the empire, which treated them well, protected their religion and allowed them to get on with their lives. And their chief rabbi or priest or monk or bishop was given a seat at the Sultan's court. So together, Muhammad al-Fatih and all the religions of his empire rebuilt Constantinople back to what its former glory was. With all these people migrating to Constantinople, they were going to need to be able to buy, sell, trade and make a living. And Constantinople had always been the center of trade routes, whether they be land or by sea. So if Muhammad al-Fatih could give it just a bit of an injection, he could really increase the economic prosperity of his new city. And for that, he built the Grand Bazaar over there, which is still in existence till today and a big tourist attraction. Let's go and have a look. I'm going to see if I can get myself a few deals. All rulers need a palace, but Muhammad al-Fatih wanted his palace to be one which made the population acutely aware of his power and his might. It would also need to be adorned with fine art so that any ambassador who came on a diplomatic mission would see it and think of this ruler as a great man. And it would also need to be close to the other institutions of power in the Ottoman Empire. And for that, he made something called the Topkapi Palace. And that's its entrance. Let's go have a look. The mosque of Mehmet II is very different to the mosque you'll see in Bursa and Edirne, the early Ottoman mosques. This mosque takes many architectural styles from the Christian Byzantine Empire and incorporates it into mosque building. So you can see a clear evolution in mosque building within the empire. But mosque building was not the only thing that was going to evolve with the Ottomans. The three main institutions of the Ottomans would also go through a lot of evolution during the course of the empire. We've already seen how the first institution, the House of Osman, has gone through some evolution. They went from having a peaceful transfer of power to actually legalizing fratricide and using it every time a sultan died. Then you have the military. Initially, they were a Turkic, Ghazi warrior, Anatolian, horseback force, but they had evolved into the Balkan Janissaries, an elite fighting force and a standing army. And the last institution that was going to evolve was that of the religious scholars. And you can see here in the Mosque of Muhammad al-Fatih around the outside, over here you can see the madrasas, which were Islamic universities which were producing scholars that would go on to work in the empire, either as imams or in the government or in the mosques or as spiritual advisors. Early on in the time of the Ottoman Empire, they used to import their scholars from places like Persia or Central Asia, which gave the Ottomans their Persianate influences. However, with the advent of Muhammad al-Fatih, he decided he was now going to bring people from within his empire to these Islamic universities, especially from the Balkans. So people of European ethnicities were graduating from these institutions, and they were then taking up the places as the judges, as the imams, as the teachers, as the spiritual advisors, and also in government, where they would tell the sultan what he was allowed and not allowed to do according to divine law. So we can see a clear evolution in who is attaining the high positions now in the empire. During the time of the Abbasid Caliphate, we can generalize and say that most of the ulama had their role as speaking truth to power, whereas during the Ottoman Empire, right from the beginning, the ulama were the power. They were the third institution of power, and they were the ones who worked at every single level of the society to make sure that each level was Islamic, and therefore making Islam the glue that stuck all the institutions together and also connected the sultan to his subjects. The mosque and the tomb of Muhammad al-Fatih is built very, very far away from the Hagia Sophia and the Topkapi Palace and all the other tourist attractions that tourists come to see today in Istanbul. There's a very good reason for that, because this site where his tomb is and where the mosque is used to be the mausoleum and a church for Constantine I, the man who built Constantinople as a Christian city, as a Christian capital, and named it after himself, Constantinopolis, the city of Constantine. Muhammad al-Fatih was the one who rebuilt Constantinople after the conquest on the foundations of Constantine I and fulfilled the prophecy of Muhammad ﷺ, changing it from a Christian city into a Muslim city. So it's very symbolic that Mehmet II, Muhammad al-Fatih, is buried on top of Constantine I, just like he rebuilt his Islamic Constantinople on top of Constantine's Constantinopolis. Mehmet the Conqueror is not called the Conqueror for no reason. Over the next 27 years he decided to go global, and he would manage to capture parts of the modern day countries of Serbia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Albania, Greece and Romania, as well as vassalizing the Crimea, the other side of the Black Sea. He also managed to take control of some Turkic beyliks as well in Anatolia. And in all these regions, when they were captured, the citizens weren't forced to convert to Islam, but if they chose to become Muslim, then that was fine. And it's because of this reason that Europe has 3 Muslim countries today: Bosnia, Kosovo and Albania. He was a very ambitious man, and he had 2 more ambitions, one which he started and the other one which he did not start. As for the one which he did start, that was to take Rome itself in Italy. And unfortunately, just as this campaign started, Muhammad al-Fatih, Mehmet the Conqueror, passed away. As for the second objective that he had, which he didn't start, that was to go south and conquer Mamluk Egypt, and in doing so take the title of the Caliph. If he had managed to do this, then he would have probably have gone down to be one of the greatest ruler outside of the 4 rightly guided caliphs which followed the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. As for the caliphate, that would be left to his successors. Because of his aggressive expansionism, Muhammad al-Fatih had actually become slightly unpopular with Ottoman elites because he demanded a lot from them. Nonetheless, he had managed to create a distinctly European empire because it was centered in Constantinople and he favored converts from the Balkans in military and state institutions over the previous Turkish aristocrats. Would this be the end of Ottoman expansionism? Had they reached the peak of their mountain? Were they going to decline, or was this the beginning of a golden age?
And so, we begin.
Make sure you watch my next episode on the history of the Ottomans from Ertugrul to Ataturk. Salam.